Okay, so if you remember, we just finished chapter 13. Now remember, Edmund is back with his brothers and sisters now. They're all at the stone table together. Aslan had a long talk with Edmund, and they seemed to have sorted things out. And then the witch came and talked to Aslan. First with everyone around, then Aslan sent them all away, and Aslan and the witch had a long talk, and then the witch left. And as the witch was leaving, she asked the lion if she could trust him to keep his word. And remember, Aslan roared so loud that he scared everyone. The witch just ran off. But the problem now is chapter 14 is titled The Triumph of the Witch. Now, actually, I should warn you. This chapter is a little bit sad. And if you would rather read something, some fairy tales or something, then we could do that. Because this chapter will be a little bit... Oh, you want to listen to this one? Okay, but I have to warn you. Although, let me tell you, this isn't the end of the chapter. This isn't the end of the book, I mean. There's still 3 chapters after it. So whatever happens in this chapter, don't be too discouraged, okay? The Triumph of the Witch. As soon as the witch had gone, Aslan said, "We must move from this place at once. It will be wanted for other purposes. We shall encamp tonight at the fords of Baruna." Of course, everyone was dying to ask him how he had arranged matters with the witch and gotten Edmund off the hook, but his face was stern, and everyone's ears were still ringing with the sound of his loud roar, and so nobody dared. After a meal, which was taken in the open air on the hilltop, for the sun had gotten strong by now, and they dried the grass, they were busy for a while taking the pavilion, the tent, down and packing things up. Before 2 o'clock, they were on the march, and they set off in a northeasterly direction, walking at an easy pace, for they didn't have far to go. During the first part of the journey, Aslan explained to Peter his plan of campaign. "As soon as she has finished her business in these parts," he said, "the witch and her crew will almost certainly fall back to her house and prepare for a siege. You may or may not be able to cut her off and prevent her from reaching it." He then went on to outline 2 plans of battle, one for fighting the witch and her people in the woods before she got back to her home, and another was for assaulting her castle if she got past them and got to her home. And all the time he was advising Peter how to conduct the operation, saying things like, "You must put your centaurs in such and such a place," or "You must post scouts here and here so that she doesn't do so-and-so." And he kept going like this until at last Peter said, But you'll be there yourself, Aslan." "I can give you no promise of that," answered the lion. And then he continued giving Peter his instructions. For the last part of the journey, it was Susan and Lucy who saw most of him. He didn't talk very much, and he seemed to them to be sad. It was still afternoon when they came down to a place where the river valley had widened out, and the river was broad and shallow. This was called the fords of Baruna, and Aslan gave orders to halt on this side of the water. But Peter said, Wouldn't it be better to camp on the far side for fear she would try a night attack or something?" Aslan, who seemed to have been thinking about something else, roused himself with a shake of his magnificent mane and said, Sorry, what was that, Peter?" And Peter said it all over again. "No," said Aslan in a dull voice, as if it didn't matter. "No, she will not make an attack tonight." And then he sighed deeply, but presently he added, "All the same, it was well thought of. Good for you, Peter. That is how a soldier ought to think. But tonight it doesn't really matter." And so they proceeded to pitch their camp. Aslan's depressed mood affected everyone that evening. Peter was feeling uncomfortable too at the idea of fighting the battle on his own. The news that Aslan might not be there had come as quite a shock to him. Supper that evening was a quiet meal. Everyone felt how different it had been last night with rejoicing, or even this morning it had been better. It almost felt as if the good times, having just begun, were already drawing to their end. This feeling affected Susan so much that she couldn't get to sleep when she went to bed. And after she had laid counting sheep and turning over and over, She finally heard Lucy give a long sigh and her turn over just beside her in the darkness. "Can't you get to sleep either?" said Susan. "No," said Lucy. "I thought you were asleep. I say, Susan." "What?" "I have a most horrible feeling, as if something were hanging over us." "Well, have you? Because, as a matter of fact, so do I." "It's something about Aslan," said Lucy. "Either some dreadful thing is going to happen to him or something dreadful that he's going to do. It's something like that." "There's been something wrong with him all afternoon," said Susan. "Lucy, what was that he said about not being with us at the battle? You don't think he would be sneaking away and leaving us tonight, do you?" "Where is he now?" said Lucy. "Is he here in the pavilion?" "I don't think so." "Susan, let's go outside and have a look around. We might see him." "All right, let's," said Susan. "We might just as well be doing that as laying awake here and not getting any sleep." So very quietly, the two girls groped their way among the other sleepers and crept out of the tent. The moonlight was very bright and everything was quite still except for the noise of the river chattering over the stones. Then Susan suddenly caught Lucy's arm and said, "Look, on the far side of the camping ground." And just there where the trees began, they saw the lion slowly walking away from them into the woods. Without a word, they followed him. He led them up the steep slope out of the river valley and then slightly to the right, apparently by the very same route they'd used this afternoon in coming from the hill of the stone table. On and on he led them, into dark shadows and out into pale moonlight, getting their feet wet with heavy dew. He looked somehow different from the Aslan they knew. His tail and his head hung low, and he walked slowly as if he were very, very tired. Then when they were crossing a wide open place where there were no shadows for them to hide in, he stopped and looked around. It was no good trying to run away, so they came towards him. When they were closer, he said, "Oh, children. Oh, children, why are you following me?" "Well, we couldn't sleep," said Lucy. And then she felt sure that she need say no more and that Aslan knew all they had been thinking. Please, may we come with you wherever you're going?" asked Susan. "Well," said Aslan, and he seemed to be thinking. Then he said, "Yes, I should be glad of some company tonight. Yes, you may come, if you will promise to stop when I tell you, and after that, leave me to go on alone." "Oh, thank you, we will," said the two girls. So forward they went again, and one of the girls walked on each side of the lion. But how slowly he walked, and his great royal head drooped so that his nose nearly touched the ground. Presently he stumbled and gave a low moan. "Aslan, dear Aslan," said Lucy, "what is wrong? Can't you tell us?" "Are you ill, dear Aslan?" asked Susan. No, it's not like that," said Aslan. "I am sad and lonely. Lay your hands on my mane, if you will, so that I can feel you are there, and let us just walk like that." And so the girls did what they would never have dared to do without his permission, but what they had longed to do ever since they first saw him. They buried their cold hands in the beautiful sea of fur around his neck, and they stroked it, and so doing walked with him, and presently they saw that they were going with him up the slope of the hill on which the stone table stood. They went up at the side where the trees came furthest up the hill, and then when they got to the last tree, it was the one that had some bushes around it, Aslan stopped and said, "Oh, children, here you must stop, and whatever happens, do not let yourselves be seen. Farewell." And both the girls cried bitterly, though they didn't even really know why. And they clung to the lion and kissed his mane and his nose and his paws and his great sad eyes. Then he turned from them and walked out onto the top of the hill, and Susan and Lucy, crouching in the bushes, watched him. And this is what they saw. A great crowd of people were standing all around the stone table, and though the moon was shining, many of them carried torches which burned with evil-looking red flames and black smoke. But such people, ogres with monstrous teeth, and wolves and bull-headed men, spirits of evil trees and poisonous plants, and other creatures whom I won't describe, because if I did, the grown-ups would probably not let you read this book. There were cruels and hags and incubuses, wraiths, horrors, efreets, sprites, orkneys, woozes, and ettins. In fact, here were all of those who were on the witch's side, and whom the wolf had summoned at her command. Remember, in the middle of last chapter, she did that. And right in the middle of all these, was standing by the table, was the witch herself. A howl and a gibber of dismay went up from the creatures when they first saw the great lion pacing towards them, and for a moment even the witch herself seemed to be struck with fear. Then she recovered herself and gave a wild, fierce laugh. "The fool!" she cried. "The fool has come! Bind him fast!" That means tie him up tightly. Lucy and Susan held their breaths, waiting for Aslan's roar and waiting for him to spring onto his enemies and fight them. But it never came. 4 hags, grinning and leering, yet also at first hanging back and actually afraid of what they had to do, they had approached him. "Bind him, I say," repeated the White Witch. The hags made a dart at him, and they shrieked with triumph when they found that he made no resistance at all. He didn't fight back at all. Then others, evil dwarfs and apes, rushed in to help them, and between them all they rolled the huge lion over onto his back, and they tied all his 4 paws together, shouting and cheering as if they had done something brave. Although, had the lion chosen, one of those paws could have been the death of all of them. But he made no noise. Even when the enemies, straining and tugging, pulling the cords so tight that they cut into his flesh, he made no noise. Then they began to drag him towards the stone table. "Stop," said the witch. "Let him first be shaved." Another roar of mean laughter went up for her followers as an ogre with a pair of shears came forward, and he squatted down by Aslan's head. Snip, snip, snip went the shears, and masses of curling gold began to fall to the ground. Then the ogre stood back, and the children, watching from their hiding place, could see the face of Aslan, looking all small and different without its mane. The enemies also saw the difference. "Why, he's only a great cat after all," cried one. "Ha! Is that what we were afraid of?" said another. And they all surged around Aslan, jeering at him and saying mean things like, "Here, pussy, 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 here, pussy, how many mice have you caught today, little kitty cat? And would you like a saucer of milk, little pussy cat?" "Oh, how can they?" said Lucy, tears streaming down her cheeks. "The brutes, the brutes!" For now that the first shock was over, the shaven face of Aslan looked to her braver and more beautiful and even more patient than ever. "Muzzle him," said the witch. That means tie something around his mouth so he can't open his mouth. And even now, as they worked around his face, putting on the muzzle, one bite from his jaws would have cost 2 or 3 of them their hands. But he never moved. And this seemed to even enrage all that rabble. A rabble is like a disorganized or a confused collection of some of the lowest class of people. It's like a mob. Anyway, so that mob was enraged even more. Everyone was at him now. Those who had been afraid to come near him, even after he was tied up, began to find their courage, and for a few minutes the 2 girls could not even see him. So thickly was he surrounded by the whole crowd of creatures, kicking him and hitting him and spitting on him and jeering at him. At last the rabble, that motley crew of lowest class of people, had had enough of this. They began to drag the tied up and muzzled lion to the stone table. Some were pulling and some pushing. He was so huge that even when they finally got him to the table, it took all their effort and a whole bunch of them to hoist him up onto the surface of the table. And then there was even more tying and tightening of cords, of ropes. The cowards! The cowards, sobbed Susan. Are they still afraid of him even now? When once Aslan had been tied, and tied so that he was really a mass of cords on that flat stone, a hush fell over the crowd. 4 hags, holding 4 torches, stood at the corners of the table. The witch bared her arms, as she had bared them in the previous night when it had been Edmund instead of Aslan laying on the ground. Then she began to whet her knife. That means sharpen her knife. It looked to the children, when the gleam of the torchlight fell on it, as if the knife was made of stone, not of steel like our knives are made. And the stone was in a strange and evil shape. At last she drew near. She stood close to Aslan's head. Her face was working and twitching with passion, but his face looked up at the sky, still quiet, neither angry nor afraid, but a little sad. Then, just before she gave the blow, she stooped down and said in a quivering voice, and now, who has won? Fool, did you think by all this that you would save the human traitor? Now I will kill you instead of him, as our pact was, and so the deep magic will be appeased. But when you are dead, what will prevent me from killing him as well? And who will take him out of my hand then? Understand that you have given me Narnia forever. You have lost your own life, and you have not saved his. In that knowledge, I want you to despair and die. The children did not see the actual moment of the killing. They couldn't bear to look, and they had covered their eyes. And that's the end of chapter 14. See, I told you it was rather sad. So hope you come back tomorrow. Hope you're not discouraged. Tomorrow, chapter 15 is going to be called Deeper Magic from Before the Dawn of Time. So you're going to come back tomorrow? Okay, I'll be waiting for you.